Life is such a balance. As I was going through my devotions today and as I was looking at different scriptures, I came across a passage in Deuteronomy that talked about how God desires obedience. As I talked with a Christian friend on the phone today, we talked about the fact that there seems to be no standards, no moral compass in our society today, that everything seems to be relative, and people don't even see the big sins of life as being big sins anymore. They are acceptable because they are the uh, acceptable things in our society. There's a balance, isn't there? We need to call sin sin. We need to be sure that we preach about sin and those things that are displeasing to God. And at the same time, there's a balance, isn't there? Because in John chapter 8, verse 7, it says, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." So how do we preach about sin without being hypocritical and the fact that we all sin and fall short of the glory of God? I think the answer lies in the fact that we should preach what God's standard is, and that we should preach with conviction, not only for those that are listening, but for those that are preaching. How can we possibly tell a congregation to cease from sin when in fact we haven't? And how can we throw a first stone when we know that there's sin in our own lives? Balance. The balance of desiring God to put a new want to in our lives. That is a desire to be more like Christ, even though we know we're not there yet. And being careful not to judge harshly others who perhaps sin in a different area than we do. It's so easy to judge somebody that smokes or drinks when you don't smoke or drink. It's so easy to judge someone who has a bad temper or a wicked tongue when we don't have those problems. But we need to be careful that we keep a balance, not to look over sin and to make sure that we continue to preach about sin. Sin is sin. God says it's wrong, and he desires our obedience, but not just for obedience sake, because he knows when we refrain from sin, we save ourselves all kinds of grief, all kinds of trouble, all kinds of problems. You only have to pick up the newspaper or watch the TV to see how many people in the last decade or two have caused themselves to be discredited completely in today's world. But isn't it hypocritical? Because we see that there's very few people who have not sinned, many times in the same kinds of areas, that those that are being judged so harshly right now by the press and media. Are we casting stones, living in glass houses? The bottom line is we need to be obedient to God, not be so much in a hurry to judge others, but to preach about sin, confessing our own sins, maybe not publicly, but certainly to God, and being sure that we understand that God doesn't have a sliding scale. He doesn't grade on a curve. Sin is sin, and he desires obedience more than he desires sacrifice. As for me, I'm going to try to become more like Christ. I'm going to try to be less judgmental, but more critical of my own lifestyle in the area of sin, and not refrain from saying that sin is wrong just because I sin or just because it's not a politically correct issue. That's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.